We're now going to have a discussion, so no presentations, no slides, but a discussion, a debate on really the subject of the day, which is how to step up in a context where we have both climate backlash, need for remobilisation. So how do we step up? How do we collaborate effectively to deliver a better future? As we've seen, there's lots of initiatives all around the world. So how does this basically scale up? How do we work together to make it more decisive in terms of impact? I'm very pleased to have 5 speakers, important speakers. We have Juliate, Keya, Malakar, who's joining us from Bangladesh, from Dhaka. I'd just like to make sure, do you hear us well, Juliate? Yes? Okay. I'm going to also invite Ninni, Ikkala Nyman from IFRC, the International Federation of the Red Cross, to join the stage. We have also Sophie Meisser from the University Hospital of Geneva. We have Jean-Pierre Reymond, who is the Executive Director of 250 Today. And we have, Miriam Gabriela Medel García from the Permanent Mission of Mexico. Okay. Great. So thanks for all of you for being here and joining us. And so I'll basically start with a question to Juliate, who is the Executive Director of the Crescent Commission for Development in Bangladesh, CCDB, which is running an important climate center, which is quite unique in near Dhaka, in Asia. And I think Bangladesh is very much at the forefront of the climate crisis. A huge level of experience which has been developed by many national actors on adaptation, on resilience. And what I'd like to ask you, Juliate, is you're currently leading this climate knowledge hub, which is promoting solutions, doing a lot of research, training thousands of civil servants, NGO workers, UN staff on what solutions can be deployed. You also contribute to policy dialogue and advocacy efforts on climate justice, climate adaptation, resilience. So I'd like to ask you a first question is really with the impacts of climate which are due to aggravate in the next years over time. What do national actors in Bangladesh or elsewhere really need to scale up their efforts towards climate resilient, low carbon, sustainable development and respond more effectively to the needs of populations? And so I'd like you to give you the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruno. I hope you can hear me loud and clear. And a very good afternoon, if I'm not wrong, but evening from Bangladesh. Thank you very much for this invitation and to be here in this, acceleration days, and it is a privilege. Getting back to your question, Bruno, it's like, that Bangladesh is one of the most vulnerable countries, actually 10th most vulnerable, climate vulnerable countries in the world. And it has a population about 180 million. About 56% of our population lives in the high climate exposure zones. So it's nothing that we are fearing that we have to face. the disaster or the effects are everyday reality right at this moment. So it's an everyday struggle for our survival. In the circumstances, there are the national actors, and also there are support from international well-wishers and governments. I would say the national actors are mostly focusing on the people, bringing people into action. And the organization I'm working with is Christian Commission for Development. This is our the major focus is to bring the climate vulnerable people into action and, working together so the technologies or the adaptation capacities can be increased together. So first thing, what we do is we have climate resilience centers in the climate coastlines. We have about 710 kilometer coastlines in 19 districts. So we do mobilize, we call CCRCs, and those centers are mostly community and locally led. And these people are empowered so they can quantify their household level risks. We are also the local actors, particularly CCDB, is also trying to build capacity so their own data can be gathered using local adaptation plans of action we call LAPA. And so these groups are not only sharing their own experiences, but at the same time using these platforms to build their capacity. And to build their capacity, there's another thing is that creating platforms that nationals are doing, actors are doing. CCDB, as you said already, CCDB has about a climate center on about 24 hectares of land, and which is visualizing, demonstrating 6 climate vulnerable zones of the country. And not only just vulnerability has been demonstrated, we demonstrate about over 100 technologies that are actually helpful, useful for adaptation in terms of livelihood, drinking water, salinity, drinking water filtration, water filtration, climate resilient infrastructure, etc. And this platform is actually used to bridge the gap that we have for knowledge sharing and technology sharing. The actors, what we do, we mostly work at the nationally and we take support from the international. So we see there is a capacity gap as well, even with the duty bearers. So we are using this climate center as a platform where people can come and share the knowledge. At the same time, we provide training facilities nationally and internationally to build those capacities. And finally, what I would also say, the national actors that we are trying, which is a very important thing, I know I was listening to everybody, is that we're trying to get access to global funds and climate finance, because when you talk about scalability, participation, having people, platforms, participations, and partnerships, that all need some kind of resource and support. But there is also one gap we find. The gap is that we do have climate-oriented sectoral transformation. But I was listening. A speaker in the morning is saying it looks like we sometimes work in silos. So what we are trying to do to create platforms for better coordinations and where the technologies are being shared. And the final thing is also what we lack is the data, climate vulnerable data and other data, which is very fragmented. So real-time climate data we are including into planning for stronger, policy practices and practice-oriented training. So I'll stop right there, Bruno, to continue further.
Yeah. So thank you very much, Juliate, and we'll come back to you for a second question a bit later. Okay, I'll turn myself to Ninni, Ikkala, Nyman from the International Federation of the Red Cross. You are the lead for climate and environment. at the Department, I think, for Disasters and Response, basically climate and response. And you have, great experience on this subject. So I'd like to ask you the following question. So IFRC is a leading organization on the preparation, the response to disasters, including those linked to climate disruption. It's currently finalizing its own footprint reduction strategy and roadmap. It's also steering with the FAO and OCHA the integration of anticipatory action, but also greening within the humanitarian reset approach, which is currently taking place. So as an international representative of an international organization which is extremely aware of climate scenarios unfolding and taking your own strong commitments, what do you think the sector needs to actually make it happen and make a difference in the coming years? What needs to take place?
Thanks so much, Bruno, and great to see you all here today. I think there's a few kind of critical areas, and the microphone.
It works.
Yeah, it works. Building a little bit on what Juliate was saying from the Bangladesh example, I think one of the primary things we need to all be reflecting on is the importance of locally led action. So whether we're talking about health crises, like we were hearing from earlier, I know we'll hear from Juliate later, whether we're talking about drought in the Horn of Africa, conflict in Lebanon at the moment, heat waves in Geneva, the solutions and these impacts, whether we're talking about climate, environmental, or health crises, are all happening locally. So the solutions need to be local. And we have, as a humanitarian sector, been talking about localization for a long time, but I think we need to go further in that. And I think that means both in terms of the identification of how we're being impacted, but that the solutions need to be designed locally as well, wherever we are in the world. We, as the IFRC, we represent 191 national societies, 290,000 branches. The solutions to the climate crisis will look different wherever we are working. One of the ways in which we're looking at this is through a climate action journey, as we call it, and that means that to date, with a lot of our planning for, let's say, floods or extreme events has been based on historical or current data, weather data. How do we now work with communities and prepare them also for what's going to come, or the uncertainty of knowing, are we looking at too much water, too little water, or a mix of both, for example. So that's one area, really looking at these localized solutions and finding those partnerships locally. I think the other part that we're hearing a lot, in particular in the humanitarian development sector at the moment, is that this is just a secondary topic. It's a luxury to be talking about climate or the environment, and everything should be about life-saving. And in particular, in the last year, we've heard a lot about that pressure to move on this focus for life-saving. I know you heard this morning from the WMO that the last 10 years were the hottest on record. So effectively, the climate and environmental crises are humanitarian crises. Whatever we call them, whatever way we want to look at them, these are issues we all need to be dealing with, whether we're working for government, whether we're working for the health sector. These are issues that we can't get away from. So we need to show, as a sector, commitment. And Bruno, you referred to this Interagency Standing Committee Agenda 25 item we're looking at. That really looks at how does the humanitarian sector at large reset, but in that broader reset and way that we need to work as a sector, how do we not forget climate and environment? And so it's, yes, working across sectors, but also within the sector. We've often looked, for example, at how we anticipate disasters in one silo, how we do our carbon or environmental footprint in another silo, and then looking separately at how we deal with climate resilience. We need to look at these issues across the board. We need to bring the sectors together and really look at this work from a more localized lens, and really not just talk of localization, but actually act locally.
Thank you, Ninni. So we've been talking here about humanitarian action, so the most extreme situations, vulnerabilities, but essential services to populations are also daily services in stable contexts in both high-income, middle-income, low-income countries. And I'd like to turn myself to Sophie Meisser, who is the lead for environmental responsibility at the Geneva University Hospital, and has taken a very strong role on transforming practices, defining the sustainability strategy of the hospital. And the HUG is one of the biggest health service providers in Switzerland. It's certainly one of the most important actors in the canton de Genève for populations. And it actually, thanks to its effort, it gained the healthcare sustainability certification last year in 2025, advancing into the implementation of its participatory strategy. And it includes both climate and health, professional practices, but also responsible consumption, choice of products, etc., and many other aspects. So what I'd like to ask you, Sophie, with your insights is, why is it important for a major university hospital like the HUG to actually integrate respect for planetary boundaries in the delivery of your services to populations and in your operating model? And what does it actually imply in practice?
Bonjour à tous, je vais parler en français puisque je suis la locale et la régionale de l'étape. Donc effectivement, on a parlé général et là on arrive sur quelque chose de très, et ça rejoint exactement ce qui a été dit avant, les solutions elles s'ancrent et elles se réalisent à un niveau extrêmement petit, même si oui on est très fiers d'être le plus grand hôpital universitaire de Suisse de ceci, mais les autres hôpitaux universitaires de Suisse sont plus grands et meilleurs sur d'autres choses. Ça, c'est les petites guerres entre les hôpitaux universitaires suisses. Pour vous donner quelques chiffres, on a 2000 lits, on a eu 50 000 personnes hospitalisées, à peu près 200 000 personnes en consultation ambulatoire et on est 13 000 personnes à travailler au HUG dans 160 métiers différents. Et transformer, intégrer les enjeux climatiques, intégrer les enjeux de durabilité, que ce soit responsabilité sociale ou environnementale dans un hôpital, c'est transformer chacun de ces métiers-là pour que ça s'ancre concrètement dans des réalisations. Le médecin transforme ses pratiques, l'architecte réfléchit comment il construit les bâtiments, le cuisinier apprend des nouvelles recettes pour les 10 000 repas qui sont servis aux patients, aux équipes et aux institutions de maintien à domicile de la région. Et c'est comme ça qu'on arrive petit à petit à concrétiser une stratégie dans quelque chose de réel. Ces démarches, en fait, et pourquoi on doit intégrer ces enjeux-là, c'est finalement notre responsabilité. Ça a été dit, que ce soit les enjeux climatiques, que ce soit les autres limites planétaires. On parlait au Bangladesh des enjeux de l'eau qui n'est pas disponible ou qui n'est pas disponible de bonne qualité dans certaines parties. Alors en Suisse, on a l'impression que ces ressources, elles sont infinies. On pense qu'on est le château d'eau de l'Europe, mais c'est simplement en fait qu'on est en retard par rapport à d'autres pays du monde dans la prise de conscience de ces enjeux-là. Et c'est toutes ces transformations qui concrètement petit à petit nous permettent d'arriver à dire qu'on est un hôpital qui a peut-être fait un peu plus de chemin que d'autres. Mais moi, ce qui me réjouit, c'est de voir qu'en fait, c'est un mouvement et qu'il y a plein d'hôpitaux, il y a plein d'institutions publiques, privées qui sont en chemin. Et je rêve de plus être citée, que la HUG soit plus citée comme exemple, parce qu'il y aura tellement d'autres institutions et d'hôpitaux qui auront été plus vite que nous, et c'est déjà le cas. Quand je vois le chemin parcouru dans ces 5 dernières années, il y a vraiment des très belles choses qui se font ailleurs. Quelques exemples concrets, pragmatiques au HUG. L'hôpital, le site principal est en ville. On avait des problèmes de parking. Donc on a incité depuis 10 ans ou 15 ans les gens à venir autrement qu'en voiture travailler. Ça devient quelque chose de chouette et de remarquable. On est médecin, on est directeur général de l'hôpital, on vient en vélo. Et on a 66% aujourd'hui de nos 13 000 employés qui viennent autrement qu'en voiture ou en transport motorisé. Et ça, c'est un chemin, et c'est un chemin d'entraînement, d'exemplarité. C'est bon, on fait les liens entre santé et environnement. La mobilité active, c'est bon aussi pour la santé de chacune et chacun. Donc là, on fait des liens, par exemple. D'autres choses qu'on avait mis en disant, ben voilà notre empreinte carbone et on doit réduire dans tous les domaines. On s'était dit, OK, on doit travailler sur les véhicules, la flotte de véhicules, on doit travailler sur la restauration. Je parlais des cuisiniers. Ben, les équipes de cuisiniers et de la restauration ont dit, OK, qu'est-ce que nous, on peut faire pour contribuer? Ben, on va réduire de 20% nos achats de viande. Et c'est nous qui nous débrouillerons à savoir comment. Vous ne nous dites pas si c'est des journées végétariennes, si on réduit les portions de viande dans les menus, mais on s'engage. Et là, c'était des engagements qu'on a pris en 2022. On vient de faire le bilan en 2025, qui était l'objectif. Et ils y sont arrivés parce que ça faisait sens dans leur métier, parce que c'était concrètement quelque chose où ils avaient les leviers pour savoir comment faire. Et c'est aussi ça, les succès, c'est vraiment d'arriver de manière très, très concrète et opérationnelle à ce que ça fasse sens dans le métier de chacun. On parle d'adaptation et de risques des canicules. Il y a 3-4 ans, à Genève, c'était pas tant notre sujet. Et aujourd'hui, et je regarde ma collègue qui est dans la salle, on a des équipes de médecins et de soignants qui se disent les canicules, c'est presque tous les étés à Genève, ou en tout cas, on doit être prêt. On doit réfléchir comment on change nos pratiques. On doit réfléchir comment on se prépare. C'est pas quelque chose de théorique. Et comment est-ce qu'on modifie l'organisation concrète de l'hôpital pour pouvoir prendre en charge des patients qui décompensent, quelles sont les pathologies les plus importantes, etc. Voilà en fait très concrètement comment on intègre dans un hôpital, localement à Genève, les limites planétaires. C'est en marchant un chemin après l'autre, chacun dans son métier.
D'accord. Donc merci beaucoup. Donc on a bien entendu le message de l'ancrage dans les pratiques et dans les métiers des organisations. So I'd like to now move to Jean-Pierre Reymond. Jean-Pierre Reymond is a Swiss ambassador. He's the executive director of 250 Today, which is an important Geneva-based climate action forum, which basically focuses on the decarbonization of institutions which are based in Geneva, international organizations, permanent missions, and others. And it gathers about 60 partners already that have, for many of them, action plans and have taken strong commitments in regards to their responsibilities. So I'd like to ask you maybe a different type of question from the three first speakers, which is about the context today. So we've talked about climate backlash, we've talked about risks of sidelining climate and environment commitments. And so what I'd like to ask you is basically, as a very experienced diplomat who's been working on these issues for several years, how do you see this current backlash on climate and ecology from wherever it comes from? It can come, whether it's sometimes citizens, whether it's organizations, whether it's businesses in certain cases. So what's your analysis, and what do you see as the type of response which is also needed in this situation?
Yes. Good morning to all of you. It's a great pleasure to be here and to have this session co-organized with the Climate Action Accelerator. So, first of all, congratulations to all what you have done, implemented, and with all partners. Also, congratulations to all the partners. So, yes, indeed, this is a strong question, and I think personally, not only as a diplomat, but as an experienced human being as you are, that the backlash is to be addressed. And as a diplomat, when you discover a country, you can have two ways to do it. The first one is to be humble and modest and say, I'm going to listen and see what's the environment. The other way is also to be, it has been done by some, to be a kind of bit missionary and say, I'm right, so I will explain to you, and at the end, you will be right as well. And here I think maybe I advise to go for the first way, to listen to this backlash. Because first of all, this backlash is maybe not universal, but it's still global, it's loud. And you see a lot of this kind of way of thinking that basically climate change is an issue, but is not the ones that we have to address immediately. And I think we should first listen to these voices and not put them aside and say, you are wrong because reality, physical reality is different, so sooner or later you will find out that we were right. I think this backlash has several reasons. The first one is that we as human beings, we have a short life memory. And we are focused on present, clear, immediate danger that will happen right now in front of us. For the rest, and it's physiological, we tend to go for the first reaction, that is to make things real and happening fast without too many efforts. And if you take the world as it is, we cannot say that we don't have problems, that everyday life is easy for everyone. And especially if you look at this backlash, is taking place more in industrialized countries than in developing countries, because they have basic needs to be filled first. And in these industrial countries, we have to admit that somehow the way that was proposed by environmentalists has not answered the everyday life problem. It was not possible, but it's also a reality. So there was a slogan in France some time ago that la fin du mois avant la fin du monde, and the end of my month before the end of the world. And I think basically this has to be taken into account. Why? Because first of all, if we have a more difficult somehow perceived life, it's a physical reality. The peak of the oil production, according to different experts, happened around 2010. And so it means what? It means that affordable energy, cheap energy, is no longer available as it used to be. So it means that you have an impact on everything. So if you translate it in everyday life, it means that life is somehow more difficult for everything, because everything is somehow more expensive. What used to be a kind of abundance that is still advertised as a reality. If you go to the supermarket, you have 3,000 yogurts, so you think it's normal. But in fact, it's not what is taking place. And so for every single citizen, and it's a reaction that is human, there is a perception that tomorrow will be not better than yesterday, but more difficult. So in this kind of situation, the first reaction is to stick to what you know and say, okay, climate change indeed is a problem, but for me is what I can afford for my children, what I can afford in terms of housing, and so on. And what struck me is that I cannot give the voice of everybody on earth by definition, but discussing with a lot of young people, and also with a generation of people around 40, 50s, for many, the future, for these young people, the future that is presented tomorrow is not really attractive, because they see what is going to happen, and they see that basically the global answer is not as good as it has to be. So what do? I think first we have to listen to each other and realize that somehow we are on a spaceship called planet Earth, where we have a number of resources that are not unlimited, that we have to take into account that we have to share everything, even if, as a diplomat, I'm paid to serve national interest. And I think precisely that we have to overcome this idea. Realize that we are really on one spaceship, where we have to do a collective effort that can be implemented and that will bring us a better life. Because this better life basically is in our hands. If we go, as we can see nowadays, I say we, but basically we are all affected. If we go to war, of course, it will make any kind of progress much more difficult. So basically, we have to make peace with ourselves, among human beings. It will allow us to make peace with the planet. And a final message before I'll answer your second question. I think it's really important that we collectively, and all the ones that are in this room and online and so on, we take into consideration that our message is fantastic, is strong, is good, but is not as convincing as we can imagine. And take this into account and realize that somehow, as I started at the beginning, be modest and humble and say, okay, let's listen to each other. Let's move forward together, because a better future, a bright future lies ahead. But it's up to all of us collectively to make it a reality.
Okay. So thank you, Jean-Pierre. I think what you say also echoes the question of the trade-offs, which are extremely important to confront, whether it's for citizens, but also institutions, organizations. And the more we're able to actually describe them, confront them, and establish the choices, and also what are their potential impacts or imagined impacts, the better we can advance on this. Finally, I'd like to give the floor to Miriam Gabriela Medel García, so head of the environment team at the permanent mission of Mexico in Geneva. So I'd really like to warmly thank you for your presence as a representative of Mexico, but of a state also in this discussion. So we know all states almost came together a bit more than 10 years with the Paris Agreement, with very strong commitments. But we know also that we are today in a moment where there's very much a divided community of states on these questions of climate action, with a pushback. And despite repeated warnings from the scientific community, predictable damage that is also very clear, with consequences on populations. The question is, how do we basically face this situation and step up from now? So I'd like to ask you the question is, in this moment where international cooperation is facing multiple pressures, how can countries that remain strongly committed to the Paris Agreement will help rebuild trust, foster convergence, cooperation, and bring others along, and keeping the ambition at the right level? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. It is really an honor for me and for the mission to be here and to be able to share a little bit our outlook on how to move forward. Yes, we are facing a very, very difficult moment. We experience it every day in Geneva in all the organizations and the processes that we belong to. But we feel that at this stage, it is really about credibility and about delivery. So there are indeed countries that are very much deeply committed to the Paris Agreement, Mexico being one of them. I mean, Mexico was one of the first countries, for example, to issue a climate change law. We have had climate change and climate action national programs from the very beginning, and I think we are also very much into the whole negotiation of the Paris Agreement since the Cancun Agreements, which in 2010 took the process from the disaster, unfortunately, that came from Copenhagen, and then we kind of started rebuilding it and ending in Paris 5 years later. So, no, 6 years later or 7 years later. So the issue here is why a country like Mexico, with 130 million people, with 40 people still below poverty lines. I mean, yes, some consider us a developed or an emerging economy, but we still face many, many challenges with a lot of problems related to climate impacts. A lot of natural disasters that have been exacerbated over the years, with migration flows that in many ways also respond to climate realities, and with an economy that is very deeply anchored in oil production. I mean, you may not know this, but in Mexico, oil is a national resource, is nationalized, and 33% of the national budget comes from oil revenues. So this is very difficult for a country like Mexico to start moving and to try to do to go to the other side and to move into a different direction. However, we are working on it and we are doing it. We are in our third nationally determined contribution. It was presented in COP30 in Brazil in December, and for the first time, Mexico took the very, very difficult decision. It was very difficult internally to have absolute reduction emission targets. And I mean, for the ones that are not always immersed into the Paris Agreement, the alternative is, and what we had done before was, business as usual or another baseline from a previous year. This time, no. The decision was no. We will go for absolute targets, which means we're going to reduce that amount by 2030, 2035, 2050. I can't tell you the amount if you want. I mean, I don't think that's very relevant right now, but I mean, the point is we made that shift. Why? Because we felt this is the next step to really go into an economy that is climate armored and protected from climate impacts. So that would be the number one, and the one thing that we do tell our partners and other countries that are similar to us or that they face similar realities or that are G20 countries that also have this type of economies. Okay, we need to move and we need to find another way to deal with this problem. Also considering all our reliance on oil, we are now really working on renewable energies. How? Involving our oil companies, our national oil company, which is Pemex, working really hard to increase renewable energy production, and then also working with the private sector as well. The other point, I think, is finance. And there, I think we have a lot of situations where the big complaint from countries, including from Mexico, and it's a real complaint, it's anchored in reality, is there's not enough finance. And climate finance is taking a backseat to respond to more immediate realities and to other crises that are emerging around the world. Our stand there is all finance to developing country parties should be climate finance or should have a climate criteria. Why? Because climate change is a cross-cutting issue. It's an existential threat, and it affects every single aspect of economic activity and of human life. Third would be, and this is also a message that we try to convey to parties that are pushing back or that are not so sure, is about inclusion. And here, I mean, my predecessors have already spoken to that. Include communities. Adaptation in our case, for example, in our nationally determined contribution, is very much territorial. Solutions need to be local, but also include the talk to everybody. So everybody sits at the table. The Paris Agreement is the most universal agreement still up to date. I mean, we have 198 parties or 97 parties. I don't know if the US has left or not yet, but anyway, it's almost universal. There are more members of the Paris Agreement than WHO, for example. So everybody sits at the table. This is the rules that we all created for ourselves. So inclusion is also about including those who are finding more challenges and listening to them, and seeing how we can together really build a different regime, a different international system that responds to the problems and to the internal and to the national challenges they are facing. And then final, it is, and it has to be, more and more a whole of government approach and whole of society approach. Sectoral approaches are gone. They are not useless anymore. They helped us when we were building up economies. Now, 2026, we really need to move beyond that outlook and go into more collaborative ways, both internationally, but also internally in our countries. And that is a way we can more or less advance and see if we can pass this hurdle that we are facing with implementation.
Well, thank you very much, Miriam. So I think the important keywords that you mentioned, so absolute reduction targets and the responsibility of the states, shifting away from fossil fuels progressively, but you also talked about what we can call climate smart programming. So all the funds and everything that's being programmed needs to integrate climate lens and criteria. And I think this speaks to also the International Geneva, because with the UN agencies, with different funds, etc., there is also an important critical mass that if it actually converts itself to climate smart programming, will have a large impact, not only locally, but also internationally through the actions they pursue. I want to come back now to Juliate, speaking from Bangladesh, now to talk about, the challenge of cooperation, collective levers. And I'd like to ask you, from your perspective, if we want to accelerate operationalization of climate action on the ground, what type of international dialogue, what type of cooperation, sharing of solutions, pooled technical resource, etc., are needed to have a positive impact? Thank you.
Thank you, Bruno, again. And it was very interesting to listen to all of you, so thank you very much. I'm trying to be, from my experience as a national organization representative and also an activist from the vulnerable community. So the collaboration, the word collaboration is a bit cliche now, but why I say that it's more fragmented and it's a slow, but while the climate risks are accelerating. So what is needed right at this moment for us is more like action-oriented collaboration. And this collaboration, it's not only, we have been talking about knowledge transfer a lot of time, but I think this is the time also the solution transfer. And this transfer can be from global north-south, south-south, but also at the same time replicating the models who are proven at the vulnerable community. And those are already existing or innovated by the community. And also we need collaboration to co-develop scalable adaptation technologies and multi-level coordination. But most importantly, I think I would say is that the partnership, what we see, what is still very much aid dependent, the partnership, particularly North and South, which is still very aid dependent, it still has a decision-taking imbalance, or I might say a bit of power imbalance, or it's more like a top-down process. What we need right at this moment, there are also a lot of information, a lot of capacities at the South. So what we need is more like global North, South, 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 a triangular cooperation, valuing each other from the perspective of inclusiveness, acknowledging the knowledge and experiences already with the community and the people, and at the same time investing on the scalability and replicating which is already available. Finally, I would just close this also telling that and there will be and there is a need also, we find, that a pooled technical resources and open access to data system. So this kind of collaboration would help us a lot, considering the circumstances and situation right at this moment we are going on. So the international cooperation, or the cooperation we are asking, it has to be more practical, decentralized, and implementation focused. Back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Julia. Just a follow-up question. So what would you expect specifically from Geneva-based actors relating to what you just said?
I think the partners and the well-wishers, we've been getting very good support, but it's from the collaboration perspective, the co-creation, and also moving from global policy to the local implementation level, that also needs. We want direct partnership with the national and local actors. And, I already said this, the co-creation and others. But more importantly, it's more investing on people, platforms, and partnerships, and not not as a fragmented projects, rather based on just and equity and as equal partners, where local capacity, local expertise also can help the international collaborators and the actors to shape global solutions. Thank you, Bruno.
Okay, thank you, Juliate. I'll turn myself to Ninni, again from the International Federation of the Red Cross. So if we now focus on the question of what we can do together. We're in Geneva, an international hub. You're connected to many actors around the world. What can we expect from better sharing of solutions, mutualization of expertise, tools, and do you think this can contribute to accelerating both your own action and that of your partners?
No, absolutely. And I think I'll just start on the reflection. And Juliate, you again touched on something I wanted to really talk about. And I think, Jean-Pierre, you were saying that we're in this age where we need to really listen. And I feel our narrative in this whole sector has been a lot around the kind of negativity, the doom and gloom. And unless we do this, the world is going to go into this catastrophic spiral. And I think it is a time to shift. It is Paris +10 we're looking at. What do we need to be talking about now? And I think it is about solutions. We need to give some positivity into this agenda that we're driving towards, and I think that has to be around collective action, and so that we jointly show why solutions matter, why sharing matters, and why we need to do it together, as you were mentioning in the case of Mexico, across sectors indeed, but also across scales. So how do we find these joint solutions? Building on our own experience, we're very much traditionally seen as a disaster management and health network. So from all levels, from local to global, it has been about sharing solutions and partnerships. We cannot act alone. We cannot become a climate and environmental expert. One of the really key actions, and that took birth here in Geneva, has been the Climate and Environment Charter for humanitarian organizations. And I see Nishani from the Secretariat, which is hosted in Geneva here. That, I think, was a really founding moment, which brought together humanitarian organizations all the way from local to global organizations to say this issue matters to us and working on it together, sharing our tools, sharing our expertise. That's the whole essence of that charter. In terms of the types of new partnerships we've needed to forge from something very localized, for example, in our work in northern Nigeria, we've worked a lot on flooding. Now we've realized, okay, drought is something we need to be working on as well. We've partnered with local universities on drought-resistant seed varieties or environmental NGOs. That's something we've never done in the past in a consistent way. At national level, building on these examples we've heard in Mexico, where we would be working on heat waves in cities in Mexicali region. Again, that's something that we would have worked on floods in the past. Now we're working on heat waves, and we're directly tying that to the delivery of nationally determined contributions or national adaptation plans. So how do we link these very community actions to national policy and what matters in country? Again, not doing these in isolation. Looking at transboundary work. We're working on watersheds, on early warning systems as part of the Early Warnings for All initiative in East Africa. And at global level, again, the Early Warnings for All is a global partnership. I know you heard about that this morning. And we have, for example, a partnership with WWF, which is an unlikely partnership for the Red Cross, and that's looking at how we can work with nature to reduce disaster risk. Then looking more at the kind of greening side, and you mentioned that, Bruno, that indeed we're working on our decarbonization roadmap with CAA. That's an example. We couldn't have done it without CAA. We don't have that expertise in-house. We're working on an environmental safeguarding strategy strategy. Again, we need to work with partners to make that happen. And the finance issue has been mentioned before. That's actually something that donors have pushed for in the case that the Pandemic Fund or Green Climate Fund are saying, listen, if you want to be accredited and access climate funds, you need to go look at these issues as well. So that's, again, a very concrete way that we need to share. And then maybe I'll just end on the point that we've been talking about finance. It's not only about the amount of finance, because I do think other funding sources are there. Mexico is an excellent example where we've had a lot of state-level investment. Geneva is investing in the environment. We don't always look at subnational investments, national investments in country, as well as obviously the commitments under Paris. Insurance modalities are something we're looking at, private sector partnerships. Those are the kind of solutions we need to look at collectively to diversify our funding, but also make sure that it's accessible. And that's a huge challenge. So in Juliate's case, are the actual affected communities or vulnerable groups accessing that funding? Are we going to fragile contexts? And are we doing that jointly?
Thank you very much. I'll turn now to Sophie Meisser, again from the Geneva University Hospital. So we've talked a lot about international cooperation. So how would you see, from the point of view of the HUG, which is more territorial service to populations, both what you would expect in terms of learning from other experiences, the way also you can contribute to others' acceleration, and what do you think might be needed to actually make it happen?
Je dirais la première chose, c'est que il y a énormément à faire, on l'a vu dans tous les domaines. Alors on parle de l'hôpital, mais on peut élaborer plus largement. Et l'humilité, et je reprends et j'aime beaucoup ce terme, veut qu'on évite de réinventer chacun la roue de notre côté. Partager les succès, ça on aime bien le faire, souvent on aime montrer, c'est ce que j'ai aussi fait, j'ai dit on est super pour la mobilité, etc. Mais aussi partager ce qui ne marche pas. Dire là où on a trébuché, là où c'est compliqué. Et ça ne veut pas dire que ce ne sera pas facile pour un autre collègue, même dans le même domaine. Et je reprends un exemple, et je regarde Sonia Rochnik, parce que c'était une conversation qu'on a eue avec le directeur de l'hôpital d'Aruba, qui était venu à Genève et qui dit « Mais nous, on fait rien à Aruba, on est tout petit, on a un hôpital, on est un tout petit pays, on n'a pas beaucoup d'argent, et on fait rien pour le climat, et on fait rien pour l'environnement. » Et dans la conversation, et vous êtes tellement exemplaire, et dans la conversation, il expliquait que réutiliser les choses, partager, c'était une évidence, alors que c'est un projet très compliqué et qui coûtera pas mal d'argent au HUG parce que voilà, on est grand et qu'on a l'habitude d'avoir pas mal de ressources. Et puis le deuxième exemple qu'il donnait, et là c'était par rapport à la résilience aux enjeux énergétiques et climatiques, il disait oui, on a plein de coupures d'électricité et on paye des panneaux solaires dans la communauté. Les panneaux solaires, ils sont installés sur les toits de toutes les maisons autour. Puis pour moi, quand il y a une coupure d'électricité, c'est l'hôpital qui prend l'énergie. Et c'est extrêmement élégant, c'est totalement renouvelable, ils sont complètement indépendants des énergies fossiles. Et c'est tellement inspirant. Et dans ces choses-là, vraiment d'apprendre les uns des autres, de partager, de comprendre pourquoi ça marche à Aruba, et ce serait un presque cauchemar d'imaginer lancer un projet comme ça à Genève, même si j'adorerais qu'on puisse faire ça. Voilà, et je pense que c'est vraiment là où on peut accélérer, on peut se renforcer en ayant vraiment des leçons qu'on apprend les uns des autres. Et oui, effectivement, je pourrais lancer ce projet-là, j'adorerais, je serais très très fière, mais je pense que ce serait un partage d'échecs à Genève parce qu'on est une autre structure, parce que, etc. Et aussi l'humilité des pays occidentaux de se rendre compte qu'en fait il y a plein de choses qui se font ailleurs dans le monde et d'aller apprendre. On échangeait avec Alexandre et tout ce qui a été fait par le Climate Action Accelerator sur la résilience. C'est quelque chose qui est encore peu compris et conscientisé. On parle éventuellement de vagues de chaleur et encore. Tout ce qui est... j'ai maintenant pas le mot en français, floods, mais inondations, pardon. On ne se sent pas trop concerné. Alors oui, il y a bien eu dans les montagnes suisses 2-3 petits problèmes, mais ce n'est pas encore des choses qui sont vraiment là. Et le jour où ça viendra, plutôt que d'essayer de réinventer des choses à la sauce suisse, peut-être d'aller simplement apprendre des autres.
D'accord, merci beaucoup Sophie. I'll turn myself towards Jean-Pierre. So, Jean-Pierre, in today's context, I mean, how can we basically better use Geneva's, long tradition and being a crossroads for so many different organizations from different sectors? How can it be used as an asset to try to, basically step up, collaborate more effectively, create more impact in the current context that we know?
Absolutely. I'm a great defender and promoter of International Geneva by definition. But without being biased, I think we have a fantastic chance here. Because first of all sectors are represented, be it government, NGOs, humanitarian, environmental, business. So we have a fantastic presence of almost a universal one, with 180 countries represented. We have international organizations. So we have an ecosystem that basically reflects the whole world. So if we take a small step back, where do we stand in 2026? First of all, we know, unfortunately, that 7 out of 9 planetary boundaries have been crossed. So it means what? It means that the living system that planet Earth is giving to us, and here I'm not very altruist, but giving to us human, is collapsing. So this is something that basically we have to take into consideration. It's like if we say tomorrow we'll no longer have oxygen, you will take care out of it. Second, where do we stand in the way we run the world? Here, the situation is not that better. The SDGs are stagnating or even regressing. So what does it mean? It means that we are pumping all the resources of the planet to make a better world, but it doesn't work. So obviously, like they used to say in Houston, we have a problem. So let's say it's desperate? No, because if we take again a look from outside, we as a human species, on our whole history, we have never been in such a somehow level of prosperity, be it for education, be it for health, be it for every sector. I mean, we made fantastic progress. So what is needed, and International Geneva is precisely the place to do it, is to shift and to integrate the planetary boundaries in our everyday life. And here, I think many of you have heard this word, that I think it's good, is to change the era, to go to the ecocene. Ecocene means that we are reconnecting, because somehow we have been disconnected by our own choices, to the reality of the planet. And so it means that we have to cooperate more and more, we have to federate more and more, and I am an absolute believer in federation, not because I am Swiss representing the Swiss Confederation, but because I'm convinced that if we work together, if we have these links and make them visible, like CA is doing somehow, but on much larger scale, we will see that we are not small, isolated spots on the planet, but we are a huge network. There are already millions and millions of people doing climate action. But basically, it's not really perceived. So everyone, maybe on its own, thinks, yes, my neighbor is doing nothing, why should I do something? But on the contrary, I think that International Geneva can precisely provide this network. That's why we have invited all international organizations, all permanent missions, to be part of our climate action. We have already 60, so there is a huge potential. So the market somehow is very big. And by doing so, we can provide solutions all over the world. And I think the work of the Climate Action Accelerator is really fantastic because it brings solutions from here to others and make them all connected. And I think International Geneva can expand it, providing a kind of global solution center that can provide solutions. We can also provide financial means because we have also very important financial centers. We can also provide tools. Somehow, if we were really efficient, we should create a new climate action international organizations. I can imagine, and I will hear you, it's not exactly the right time to propose this international initiative. But at least together, all the one in this room and beyond, I think by connecting, federating all each other, helping each other, we can provide this message of action and of hope and make sure that the future we build is a future that is sustainable and not going backwards.
Thank you, Jean-Pierre, for this call, and I'll turn myself to Miriam. So I'd like to ask you, as representative of the state of Mexico, but also taking into account what Juliate said on the need for including national partners and moving away from top-down approaches, etc. So, what would be in your eyes the practical forms of cooperation that actually could contribute to both mobilizing and being more impactful in this field?
Thank you very much. Thank you for this question. I mean, I think Mexico actually suffered a lot from top-down approaches. We have our country is very, very diverse. And then in that diversity, we have over 200 indigenous groups, which for a long time were not considered in the development or policy solutions. Fortunately, and then I would say to me, the answer has to go with that. Go into the community and see what's the wisdom of the community, what can the community offer. In our case, we found that indigenous knowledge is very relevant for the ecosystem. That indigenous peoples, and this goes into Mexico, but all over Latin America, and I'm sure many other parts of the world, they have been holding this knowledge on how to take care of the environment, on how to utilize resources that was dismissed, but that now we need to go back to. So there are a lot of agricultural practices, agroecological practices, ways to relate to the biodiversity, ways to restore ecosystems that are coming from them and that are really essential if we are going to succeed in tackling the challenges. So innovation sometimes, and I think, yes, it's time for solutions. It's not time for gloom and doom. It is really time for solutions. But sometimes innovation actually needs to come from looking into what you were doing before you made a mess. So really, it's really important to incorporate that into the national policy. Now, and before I finish, the issue here is at the international level and at the climate change process, the UNFCCC and possibly UN biodiversity and the certification, we have a tendency to try to bring in, let's talk about indigenous peoples and how include them when we are at the conference. And then you have delegates from indigenous groups that bring a lot of wealth of knowledge to the conference, which is great, it's very important, but it's not enough, and it's not where we should start. We need to start the day after COP ends, after the conference of the party ends, go back home, and then start talking with your local communities. Because then that's the only way you can build your national position. including them. When and I always feel very, unfortunately or fortunately, I have been to more than 10 climate change conferences, which is a lot. I don't really recommend it. That's why I'm now in other topics. I have people coming up to me, Mexico, do this, join this initiative, try to move to that. Yes, I may want to, but I already have instructions. As a delegate, when I get to the negotiating table, I already have instructions. So my main message for this inclusion is work with your government officials, with the people that you know are going to be going to the conference back at home. And knock all the doors, make them accountable. We governments, we're paid to hold national positions, but we are paid by our taxpayers. So we are accountable to them. So they, it's really very important to do that work at home from day one until we finish the cycle in the next conference.
So you're telling us make states accountable. So thank you very much. We're coming to the end of this panel. So thanks for all your inputs. Maybe just a few wrap-up remarks. What I take away from this panel is the importance of first of all, not dropping the ball because the situation is aggravating and that it's time to basically step up commitments, but to focus on operationalizing, on basically action-oriented solutions, putting it in the hands of professionals who must question their practices, so to make it really practical. What I hear also is the value of sharing experience, solutions, challenges, and how you overcome them, both at national, local, but also international level. And that there is today probably a space that needs to be filled in to make these connections and make them valuable for those actors who are wanting to accelerate and to inspire others through their exemplarity. I hear also the need for inclusion, and that it cannot be just a cooperation that is just the usual suspects. It has to be absolutely inclusive and useful to those that are practicing climate action and helping them to go faster. So thanks to all of you. There will be next steps, consulting on these fundamental questions. What are practical forms that can be useful? But in the meantime, I wish you a good lunch, and we look forward to having you back for the lightning talks at 2:00, which will be actually practical examples.
Yes. Yes, Bruno has mentioned, thank you so much. It was so good to have states, hospitals, organizations, so we really appreciate it. So yes, we are breaking for lunch. It is self-catered, so please feel free to stay within the neighborhood, have a quick bite to eat, and please do come back for the lightning talks after, and panel 2 as well. And I just wanted I wrote something down. I thought maybe Jean-Pierre would say it, and next time we hear Houston, we have a problem, I think we can say Geneva, we have a solution. Yeah, cringe, but thank you so much to everyone.